everyone, and welcome to our next Houdini tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to play around with some more divergence fields. So in this tutorial, I have some flames that kind of get sucked into like a superhero way from my character like this. And they kind of just disappear. It's actually quite easy effect to achieve, and we're going to just cover it in this tutorial. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is lay down a geometry node. And the geometry node, we're just going to call this build. And we're also going to build another geometry node that we're going to export our character into that we're just going to call character. We'll come back to this later. So we'll go inside build, and there are two things we need to bring in is our character animation, and also we need to design our emitter. So for our character animation, I'm actually using a site called Mixamo. If you've never used Mixamo before, this is what Mixamo looks like. Mixamo has a ton of free animations that you can download and just use for fun and to test your creations with. So I highly recommend it as a resource. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use FBX character import to get our character in. So we're going to bring this in, scroll down, and I'm going to use my spellcasting XBF like this. And you might notice if you skim through the keyframes, there's no animation on this. That's okay. The first thing I'm going to do is just lower my timeline to 120 frames, and then I'm going to add a bone deform. So bone deform, and just if you plug it in here, is just going to take that animation information and put it on your mesh. So you're going to have an animation that's working now. Now also is a good time to so I'm going to save what I have and also turn on autosave. I'm also going to drop down a null called out character. I'm also going to jump up here, bring over to my character little area here over here, and import my character. So I can work on my build and also kind of ghost my character if I want. Now our character is pretty small, it's under 5 meters. So what we're going to do next is we are going to create the emitter for the fire. So for the fire circle, basically what we're doing, if I ghost this circle, we want the circle to kind of be centered around the character as the character moves, as seen in our flipbook. So I'm going to make this a little bit big, crank up those divisions to like 50. So just so a NURBS curve, go to the XZ plane like this. Basically want to also put down an extract centroid, so it's, when I copy this extract centroid down here, so it's the middle of the character. I want the circle to be centered around the character, so I'm going to use a copy to points. Plug the circle in there. Now you can see the circle will move, and it's always going to be centered around that character. Problem number 2 is that if we go down here and we take a look at our circle, we also want to kind of refine this emitter, because we can't have the character standing in the fire. I mean, that's a choice you can make, but I want a ring of fire around my character. So I'm going to go and turn off archetype to open arc, and I'm going to double check because we've got some interesting stuff happening here. I'm not sure. Oh, we might have 2 points here instead of 1. So I'm going to go detail, which is going to make only one circle up here, and I'm just going to go Control S to straighten up my lines, and I'm going to drop down a sweep node. My sweep node I'm just going to place down up here, and there's a ribbon. And I'm going to give it some, we don't need to stretch it too much. I'll reverse that. We're going to give it a lot of rows and columns because we need that detail for the emission. That might be too much. Let's go over here to subdivide. We'll put down a subdivide. Not sure if that did too much, but we'll just check. Okay, I don't think it did much, so we're going to take that away. We're going to now transform the circle downwards a little bit because we don't want the fire. You can have it like a belt of fire around the character if you really wanted to. I'm going to have my fire on. So we're going to just go negative 0.3. Might be 8. Basically wanted to align it with the feet of the character. So 6 might be too much. So now the fun part can begin, now that we have our character in the scene and we also have the start of our emitter. So what we're going to do next is that we need to put down an attribute noise, and we need to put this attribute noise down here. You can see, like, I'm going to just make sure ghosting is turned off here. We need to change this to a float and turn down element size to something that we can see. I want to just make sure my normals are facing the correct way. So you can see this noise pattern if needed. Turn off materials. And I'm going to go enable remap, and I'm also going to just turn this over to smooth shaded just so I can see any patterns that are happening. Okay, so we're going to play around with this a little bit more. So we actually need a really small element size. 0.2. Okay, this may not be, I just want to convert this to polygons really fast, just to make sure this is working correctly. Okay, there we go, that was our, forgot to convert it to polygons. And we're also going to subdivide this as well. There we go, now we have some cool strobe lines. Now we're going to take a scatter node, put our scatter in here, and use a density a CD as a density attribute. So this is going to scatter on the white parts. And I'm just going to play around my ramps. There we go. Now the fun part is that I want kind of gaps in the circle, so I'm going to put another scatter node down here. And I'm just going to scatter, maybe, I'm going to turn on my point visualizer so it's easy to see, random areas to kind of take away points. So I'm going to say copy to points here, sphere, using a primitive because it's going to load faster. And you can see that we have spheres. Now the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to do this. And I'm just going to call this cull. $OS points and keep in bounding regions like that. So now we have areas that I'm just going to make this a little bit larger. It's okay if the spheres intersect, that's part of the look. So now what we are going to do next is just go here, delete points, cull. So now we have specific areas that are going to be emit fire, and you can choose areas you want, and so that we're going to use that as kind of the base. So the next thing I want to do, we're going to come back up to our character later because we have to create the divergence field for that. But now the fun part can begin where we place down our billowy smoke. Well, actually, the other thing I want us to take a look at, those are moving because based on the position, but I might want to just double check that when I'm using my attribute noise, I have animation turned on. I'm going to turn my pulse duration to something really small too. That looks better. And now we'll put down our billowy smoke. I like using the presets because it's a lot faster for me to drop down 10 nodes that I need instead of loading them up one by one by one. And I'm going to just bring this down here. We're going to connect this with it. Go to our pyro source. And now we're going to go to keep input. We're going to say to Houdini, also because this is fire, we want to initialize burn and we initialize fuel. And we want to make sure we also have velocity in there. So we're going to have to custom create that. Velocity. Velocity-wise, our points don't really have any velocity. Well, they kind of do. Let's make some better velocity of just the fire going upwards. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to point velocity stop over here. Set the value. I'm going to give it a value 1. Curl noise. And now we should have some randomized kind of movement, which I think is going to be interesting. Now the next thing we're going to do is just get rid of this node and then go to our, and we're going to turn the viewport black, so hit D and then go to background, light, dark, zoom out, and fix your particle scale. Also turn on velocity blur because you're going to need that as well. And then we're going to go to burn and go to fuel, and there we go. So now we have our emitter set up, hopefully, and we're going to drop down a file cache circle, and we're going to let that cache out, but I'm also going to go to my $F here and go -25 because we want pre-roll on this emitter. So we're going to go, now we're going to move up and work on our divergence field. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work on our divergence field. So I'm going to just create some point velocity. I'm going to put this over here above our character so our character renders with the velocity. Now the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to drop down a VDB from polygons because I find this works better. So I'm going to plug this into here and we're going to switch from distance VDB to fog. We're going to call this divergence. Make sure you don't spell this incorrectly. And we're going to turn off our character. So now we can see this volume that's starting to develop, but we have to make it more high res. So you can do that by just lowering the voxel size. You might have some areas like in the feet where it's going to be very hard to tell that's where the feet are, but that's okay. The only part of where we're putting the divergence field is actually around the character's hands. So we actually have to isolate the character's hands. So if you go blast, put that above VDB from polygons, go here and just select your character's hands or whatever part of the body you want to make this, basically the divergence field attracted to. You can do that as well. So I'm going to go enter. Non-selected, so we now have the hands as the areas of where the flames will be attracted. And then we'll go to VDB from polygons, and those look really small. They don't look as, the divergence field does not look as dense as I want, so I'm gonna change it with a volume wrangle. But before I do that, I'm gonna fill the interior, and I'm just gonna make sure I'm transferring my point velocity over because sometimes You need it, and sometimes you don't, but I always do it just in case. So now I'm going to use a volume wrangle. Nope, not a volume VOP, though you can do it with a volume VOP. Wrangles I just find are easier. So I'm going to go at divergence times equals, I'm going to give it 10. So that looks better. So now the next part we're going to go, and we're going to add a file cache. I'm going to call this basically divergence. I'm going to copy divergence because that's the attribute that we've created. And before I cache this out above it, I'm going to basically add a switch node and then a null as well. The reason I'm doing this is because I don't want my pyro fields, my divergence fields, to affect my simulation before frame 0. And this is just like helps me, and it also kind of helps the file cache in some ways, because if we're caching out a cache that's from -25 to 120, and we know we won't be using the divergence field for the first 25 frames, then we don't need to cache it out. So I like doing this just in case I forget not to do that. So it guarantees that when the file cache actually recaches, it doesn't actually pick up any information it doesn't need to save. So I like to do this. So before frame 0, so we'll make sure that's working. So it's kind of the opposite. We need to make it greater than. Okay. Cool. So after frame 1, we'll have the hands, and before frame 1, we will not. And now we will go to save to disk and continue. Drop down another null. We're going to call this out divergence. So our divergence fields are now cached out. So this is looking pretty good. Now the fun part about this is that now we get to do work on our simulation. So far so good. Look at that. It's pretty low res, so we're going to probably lower the voxel size to 0.5 for now. And I like to go over here and just crank up my density so I can see what I'm working with, and then compute the range if I need to, and use a constant color. So I like to use a darker color for my smoke, and because we're using a darker background, that's going to be an issue, so we'd have to change this back to light. Let's go back, focus on our billowy smoke solver. Let's go down here and add in the fields that we need to add to our sourcing tab. So let's go 1, 2, because we have to bring in the burn and also the fuel. So I'm going to do burn, flame, and also fuel, and I'm going to use temperature. So now from here, all we really need to do is just adjust the fields that we want to adjust. So I like to turn my dissipation up to a 0.1 for this, and then I'm going to turn off my wind. I'm going to give it a little bit more buoyancy. I'm going to keep this the way it is for now, because when we sim it back, we'll know how much, disturbance and turbulence we'll need, so we'll just let that cook out for a couple seconds. Alright, so we have some cool things going on here. Definitely we need more density. So we're going to crank up our density to 3, and we're going to turn on our fire just so we can see where our flames are. Ooh, look at that. That looks cool. And that's looking real promising. Nice. The other thing that we'll want to do is go inside here and add our volume source, and this is how we're going to bring in our divergence field. Initialize divergence, we got it there, copy, and from here I'm also going to crank up my density a little bit more. I'm not gonna put it back on the pre-roll until I'm happy to do that. I'm just going to turn on my character so as a reference we can see where everything is in the scene. Our viewport is decided not to work, so we're going to reset the viewport. Now let's take a look. Alright, so somehow we've got our fire working. We're definitely going to need more disturbance, so I'm going to put more disturbance in. Crank that up to 24. And I'm also going to go dive inside here because now we have to tell Houdini, hey, -45 on this, because we want to create a suction effect with our disturbance field. And now let's play that back just to see how this goes. Alright, so unfortunately I don't think we've applied enough force to our scene. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to give this a crazy exponentially high value. And then we're just going to check in to see if this is working or not. And then based on this working, we're going to move on to the next step of our experiment. So we do have our flames, and for whatever reason it's still not suctioning the way we want, so we have to go back and just check that our divergence field is working. So I'm going to change my background to dark. I'm going to hide. Okay, what I'm going to do next with our volume wrangle, I'm going to go back up here where it says 10. I'm actually going to give it a multiplier of CHF. I'm going to put this here, And I'm just going to give this a value of 100. It's going to be really buff. And I'm going to save that out. So we go back to frame 1. And I'm going to go back down here. And I'm actually going to give this pre-roll to see if the pre-roll changes anything. Alright, so now that we have pre-roll, I still don't see... We're going to just see if the divergence field is going to work now. Because you remember, it turns on after frame 1. And there we go! Now it is working. Perfect. So now let's factor in our character and let's show where our character is. Perfect. So we have it going into the hands. Now, I think after a certain period of time, I'd really like it if these flames were like a little bit more high res, and I also want to make sure they're cut off below the ground. So collision wise, we're going to go to ground planes, go closed below, and I'm also going to say here, I'm going to make this a little bit more high res, so maybe 3, and I'm going to also make my sourcing source scale, we're going to bring this up to 2, and I'm also going to add a little bit more disturbance now back into this, so maybe 34. Okay, that's looking really good. We've got some really cool smoky flames. I'm only going to go back to my billowy smoke look here, bring this into a physical black body. And then now, I think what I'm also going to do is go to my sourcing tab and go to limit source range like this. So I'm going to say to Houdini, hey, turn off cycle length, and from, remember we need pre-roll, so this is going to start at -25, and then this one is going to go to frame 12. I think, actually let's do to frame 5. So after this, we're going to just reset the simulation and play this back, and you should see something pretty cool happen. Okay, now that we're done, let's play this back. See what happens to our flames. So they get sucked in. See where the impact points are, where the suction is happening. You know, I would think we actually need some collisions to happen, because I think our fire is actually going straight through our character, not around it. So, and I also think we need to work on this timing a bit, because we don't get to see the flames just be flames until they get sucked up. So I'm going to switch this over to manual mode. We're going to go over here to our volume source. We're going to choose a frame for this suction to start on. So we're going to go frame, let's say 37 is going to be the peak. And we're going to say frame 11 over here is going to be 0. And then that should work fine, because we stop emitting flames around frame 5, so we need to probably stop emitting around frame 11. So let's go over here and change that to frame 11. Now let's introduce collision. We do have our animation up here, so I'm going to go up here to our out character. I'm going to plug that in. I'm going to go to our billowy smoke solver and go to quick setups, and then go to SDF collision. That should set this up over here. Now it's connecting to something else, I'm not sure what. So we'll just disconnect this. Ooh, okay, perfect. I'm not sure why it's choose disconnect me from everything else. Silly Houdini. So we can reconnect that, and we should have collisions. So let's go to collisions, SDF, perfect. And let's go to manual mode. Out of manual mode, let's restart our simulation. And I'm going to do a quick flipbook to kind of showcase what can happen. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to go to VBD from polygons, because look, our character's a little bit too big. I'm going to just disconnect this with delete channels. Make that a little bit more high res. And now we can restart our simulation and also flipbook. Alright, so you can see our result here is a little bit different. I think there's a couple things we need to change. Our collisions are working, our suction is working. However, because our flames die a little bit too soon before the suction kicks in, it dissipates before it gets sucked into the hand. So I think that's what we need to change next. We're going to go to sourcing, and we are going to go to, we're going to make this 24 frames. And now I'm going to restart this, and we'll get started from there. Alright, so this is our effect so far. We've got some flames. They come forward a bit. I don't know if I'm a fan of the circle moving as the character steps forward, but to me, I kind of think that this is an alright experience. They're definitely more attracted to the singular hand over there than they are the hand in the front. But I think that is also because of the movement of the character. So as the character steps forward, that hand becomes closer to the flame, so they gravitate towards that one the most. I think this is a win, and I think I'm just going to do one rotation around the character so we can kind of see how everything is colliding. Make sure nothing is going through the character. Perfect. Yeah, they mostly are headed towards that hand of all of them. And I think if we wanted to change a couple things, is just making everything a little bit brighter to really like kind of sell how dangerous this is. This is the end of this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.